This video is a deep dive of Aurelia, the Law Above for Commander. This isn't a deck tech, so I'm not going to give you a 100 card list of exactly what to put in. Instead, we're going to be exploring all of the synergy options with this card. The goal of this video is to have the value of like 5 to 10 deck techs. I've got around 250 cards to show you in various categories that either synergize with Aurelia or what the deck might want to do in general. And you can pick from among those cards to build the deck yourself. Because if you're like me, building the deck and making it personal is really one of the best parts of Commander. So, Aurelia the Law Above is a legendary angel for 3 red-white. She's a 4/4 with flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever a player attacks with 3 or more creatures, you draw a card. Whenever a player attacks with 5 or more creatures, Aurelia the Law Above deals 3 damage to each of your opponents and you gain 3 life. I really feel like this is one of the strongest Boros commanders we've had, and also looks very fun too. Having card draw on a commander is always powerful, and it's very uncommon in red-white. If those abilities triggered whenever you attacked with the right amount of creatures, that would be okay, but this is way better than that. These trigger whenever a player attacks with the right amount of creatures. This makes her much better, and maybe more importantly, much more fun to build, because we can manipulate our opponents into attacking. And we're going to go into just a whole bunch of cards on how to do that. But first, I want to talk about LifeLink. If we give Aurelia LifeLink and that second ability triggers, assuming we have 3 opponents, we're going to be dealing 9 damage and getting the 3 life offer plus the 9 damage lifelink. In my opinion, Basilisk Collar and Shadow Spear are your best bet. You can drop them on turn 1 when you don't have much else going on anyway, and equip it once you get Aurelia out. There's some cards that give lifelink to all attacking creatures, and while this is sometimes arguably better, if your opponents manage to trigger that second ability on their turn, Aurelia won't have lifelink for that. We could even put something in the deck that copies triggered abilities. Stoic Resonator is your most mana efficient option for that, but we also have Lithoform Engine, which has the added bonus of being able to copy target instant or sorcery spell, or target permanent spell. Damage doubling cards seem awesome in this deck, and I'm going to lump in the cards that do additional damage here. These vary quite a bit in how good they are. There's some that only affect red sources you control, which cover Aurelia's triggered ability, which is what you want, but probably not all of your creatures. There's some that affect all sources you control, and that seems really good, and others affect all sources, period, including your opponent's sources. And this could actually be the best of all, because remember, we can force our opponents to attack so that we can trigger that second ability on their turn. So it really depends whether they're attacking your mutual opponents or they're just going after you. If we're gonna put these in the deck, which I personally probably would, we're gonna need cards to deter our opponents from attacking us, and I'll go over those too later in the video. There's a bunch of options for giving our creatures haste. That'll help us trigger those 2 abilities, although Aurelia does have haste herself anyway, so I think I would pick one that give all creatures haste. We have 2 options there, Mass Hysteria, an enchantment for 1 mana, and I really like this one, Frenzied Saddlebrute, a 5/4 for 5 mana with haste, and all creatures can attack your opponents and planeswalkers your opponents control as though those creatures had haste. Additional combat phase cards are another way to get more value off of Aurelia, including actually the original Aurelia. Some standouts here include Savage Beating, which if you entwine it, gives creatures double strike in addition to the extra combat phase, and you can finish players off real fast like that. Also World at War, which has Rebound, so you get to do it next turn also. And Aggravated Assault, as well as Hellkite Charger. If your deck runs infinite mana combos, then you can have infinite combat steps. Alright, I think it's time to talk about forcing our opponents to attack. For starters, we have cards with Goad. Until your next turn, those creatures attack each combat and attack a player other than you if able. These days, we have a lot of Goad options, but Disrupt Decorum is still my favorite. For 4 mana, goad all creatures you don't control. I think Taunt from the Rampart might give it a run for its money though. For 5 mana, goad all creatures you don't control. Until your next turn, those creatures can't block. I think that the aura options are worth considering also because you can put it on your creature for benefit if you need to. Another one of my favorites is Bloodthirsty Blade, an equipment for 2. It gets +2/+0 and is goaded. Pay 1, attach Bloodthirsty Blade to target creature an opponent controls. Activate only as a sorcery. So even if the creature it's attached to dies, you can just re-equip it. Well, technically not re-equip, but you can reattach it to something else. Or just keep moving it around to the most dangerous creature on the board. I think possibly though the best way to goad creatures is with other creatures. This is likely to be a fairly creature heavy deck, I would think. At least that's how I'd build it. Notable here is Suntaran General. For 5 mana, you get a 5/5 with Trample and Haste. Battalion. Whenever Suntaran General and at least 2 other creatures attack, for each opponent, goad up to 1 target creature that player controls. Those creatures can't block this turn. I love Battalion and anything like it for this deck. If our deck is built to maximize value on Aurelia's triggered abilities, then it's going to work with Battalion too. In fact, I've got a bunch more Battalion-like cards to show you later on in the video. Bothersome Quaint and Vengeful Ancestor are also really good creatures for the deck if we're doing a really heavy goad theme. Another option is auras that force enchanted creature to attack, but this is not the same as goad that can attack you, so I'm personally not as keen on these. Same goes for the instants and sorceries that force attack. They could be good, yeah. I especially like Master Warcraft, an instant for 4 mana. Cast the spell only before attackers are declared. You choose which creatures attack this turn, you choose which creatures block this turn, and how those creatures block. Keep in mind, you don't choose who those creatures attack though. Now, just like we talked about with goading, I would be looking for creatures that can force attack. Here we've got a few that target a creature and make it attack. If you're paying mana into it though, that can get a little mana intensive. Lysandra looks good. It only costs 1 red to make target creature attack. I've saved the best for last though. These next cards force all creatures to attack. Sometimes that includes yours, sometimes it's just your opponent's. And in cases like Bedlam that just says creatures can't block, and that's not the same as forcing them to attack, but in some cases they might be incentivized to attack with it anyways if it's not a utility creature. For those goad themed decks, Total War and War's Toll are really good. Because if one of their creatures is goaded, well now all their creatures have to attack. And War's Toll has the added bonus of kind of getting around instant speed stuff, because if they cast anything on their turn, they have to tap all their lands. Warmonger Hellkite has a fire-breathing effect for all attacking creatures, and of course that includes your opponents if you're using it on their turn. Angel's Trumpet is a weird one. Attacking does not cause creatures to tap. At the end of each player's turn, tap all untapped creatures he or she controls that did not attack this turn. Angel's Trumpet deals 1 damage to that player for each creature tapped this way. Fumuko the Lowblood is my favorite of the bunch. For just 4 mana, it says creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able. That's right, it works continuously, not just once. It doesn't affect you, and you don't have to keep putting mana into it to make it work. It's also a solid attacker or blocker with that Bushido ability. If our deck is built to force our opponents to attack, then they're probably going to be coming at us quite a bit. That's where this next batch of cards come in. We're going to disincentivize them from attacking us or incentivize them to attack someone else. Ghostly Prison says, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. And there's a bunch of other cards similar to it. That mana they have to pay is going to add up pretty quick, especially if they've got a bunch of creatures that are forced to attack. We could just cut to the chase and use Blazing Archon. Creatures can't attack you, period. That's it. 9 mana is a bit steep though. These ones incentivize your opponents to attack your mutual opponents, which is pretty fun. Curse of Opulence is my favorite. For just 1 mana, it's a curse. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, create a gold token. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. It's essentially a treasure token. Or we can disincentivize them from attacking us with cards like Farsight Mask. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, if Farsight Mask is untapped, you may draw a card. Since every commander deck needs card draw and ramp, I love cards like this and the curse I just showed you. They fit the deck's game plan while also doing the stuff you have to do anyway. Darien King of Kajeldor is another one I like. Whenever you're dealt damage, you may put that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens into play. On a future turn, those 1/1 tokens can help you get that second Aurelia trigger. These cards can prevent damage to you, and I do think that's good, especially if they are lower mana, but still not as good as forcing your opponents to attack somebody else. Next up, protecting our creatures. Since our creatures are going to be swinging a lot, I suppose depending on the situation, they could be blocking a lot too. Giving them indestructible or protection or being able to remove damage from them can be very powerful. Reconnaissance is a standout in this deck. For just 1 mana, it says pay 0, remove target attacking creature you control from combat and untap it. This actually does more than it sounds like it does. First of all, if we can't profitably attack, we can attack to get Aurelia's triggers, then use Reconnaissance on as many of the creatures as we want before blockers are even declared. But the less obvious use is after blockers are declared, after damage is dealt, and some of the creatures have died. Until combat ends, our creatures are still technically attacking. So before combat is over, we can then activate Reconnaissance to untap our attacking creatures, giving them kind of pseudo-vigilance. Now let's quickly talk tokens. One good strategy for Aurelia might be token focused. I'm not going to go too far in depth on this, but these are some of the strongest choices, some of the most mana efficient ones. And kind of unique to Aurelia, this deck may want to give your opponents tokens so that they can attack, triggering Aurelia's abilities. I think I might like Ox Drover here because it draws you cards, as well as gives your opponent's creatures. In the beginning of the video, I mentioned Battalion. Battalion is a great way to get some kind of redundancy on what this deck is doing. Just other cards that synergize with the deck in general. A few of these are actually Battalion, and some, like Aurelia, are just Battalion-like. Standout among them is Firemane Commando. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card. Whenever another player attacks with 2 or more creatures, they draw a card if none of those creatures attacked you. Quick shout out to Angel Tribal. I'm not going to go in depth on this one either, but Aurelia might be a decent commander for Angel Tribal, seeing as angels generally fly and they're hard to block, so they can better trigger those abilities. If you liked this style of video, please let me know in the comments. These videos take like 15 hours to make between research and editing and all this. It's quite a lot. But if these are popular and helpful, I'd love to do some more of them. So hit that like button and consider subscribing. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.